After the Taliban took over Kabul, residents are desperate to flee Afghanistan's beleaguered capital. A mass exodus is underway in the capital city. And amid all this chaos and mayhem at the Kabul airport, 5 people have lost their lives. The reason is yet to be ascertained. But the reports came after the US Army fired shots in the air to keep the crowds away. The Karzai International Airport authorities have announced the suspension of all commercial flights. The closure of the Kabul airspace also means that Indian flights will not be able to operate now. Through the statement, airport authorities have called on the people to avoid crowding the airport. Amid the chaos, US troops fired shots into the air at Kabul airport this morning. After the Taliban takeover of the country and the fall of the Afghan government, thousands of Afghans crowded onto the tarmac in the hope of catching a flight out of the country. Scores of Afghans crowded the Kabul International Airport. There were some scuffles among the people, unable to get a place as departures were stopped. Another eyewitness video showed people shouting inside an Istanbul-bound flight that reportedly could not take off. Urging the Taliban to allow the Afghans and other nationals to leave the country, more than 60 nations have issued a joint statement saying Afghans and international citizens who want to leave Afghanistan must be allowed to depart. The US State Department added that airports and border crossings must remain open. It also added that those in positions of power and authority across Afghanistan bear responsibility and accountability for the protection of human life and property, and for the immediate restoration of security and civil order. The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security and dignity. The joint statement has been signed by countries including Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Qatar and the United Kingdom. The US Embassy in Kabul suspended operations and warned the Americans to shelter in place and not try and get to the airport. According to a State Department official, almost all US Embassy personnel have relocated to a facility at the Hamid Karzai International Airport. The US has also secured Kabul's international airport to enable the safe departure of thousands by civilian and military flights. Several hundred employees of the US Embassy in Kabul have already been evacuated from Afghanistan. Accelerating evacuation efforts, the United States has sent 6,000 troops to the airport to fly out embassy personnel as well as Afghan interpreters. Also part of the departure plan are thousands of Afghans eligible for US special immigrant visas. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has played down America's hasty exit, as he still calls it a successful mission.
Let's take a step back. This is manifestly not Saigon. We're working to make sure that our personnel are safe and secure. We're relocating the men and women of our embassy to a location at the airport. It's why the president sent in a number of forces to make sure that as we continue to draw down our diplomatic presence, we do it in a safe and orderly fashion.
UK troops have also arrived in Kabul to aid the British nationals and the diplomats still in the country. European nations and the European Union are also scrambling to evacuate their citizens and the local staff from Kabul. In a tweet, the French ambassador to Afghanistan, David Martinon, showed himself on a helicopter leaving the heavily fortified green zone. France will also start airlifting its citizens from Kabul by tonight. The French citizens will be evacuated to a base in the UAE. Germany has also shuttered its embassy in Kabul, and it is preparing to send military transport planes to evacuate as many Germans and local Afghan helpers as possible. People have appealed to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the Foreign Minister for an emergency visa program to help local staff who worked for them to leave Afghanistan. As a part of efforts to evacuate citizens of New Zealand, their government is sending a C-130 Hercules military transport plane to Afghanistan. For 53 New Zealanders, defense officials have said that they plan for a month-long mission involving at least 40 military personnel tasked with servicing and protecting the plane.
In relation to Afghan nationals seeking to come to New Zealand, Cabinet has confirmed that we will continue to make every effort to support the repatriation of New Zealand citizens and permanent residents and immediate family members travelling with them and their dependents.
For more on these developments, joining us on the broadcast is investigative journalist Michael Kay, speaking to us from Athens. Hi, Michael. Good to have you back with us. You've spent nearly a year working in Kabul, Kandahar and Helmand as a strategic military planner. This was in 2003 to 2004. You've also reported extensively on Afghanistan. Tell us what comes to your mind when it comes to these scenes that we have been witnessing unfold. The absolute chaos witnessed in Kabul airport. 5 people have now lost their lives.
Yeah, I'm absolutely flabbergasted by the approach that Western politicians are taking. Not just the sound bites that are coming out from Secretary Blinken that you just played, but also the actions as well. Signing a joint statement by 60 countries in the hope that it will apply any form of pressure on the Taliban. It's just absolute nonsense. In military parlance, we talk about soft power and hard power. Soft power being diplomacy, hard power being military activity when soft power or diplomacy fails. And what we're getting here, which is truly bizarre from a strategic military planner's perspective, is diplomacy which failed. That's the reason 100,000 coalition troops were sent into Afghanistan. That failed. And then the politicians think that diplomacy is going to work again. So you're going soft power, hard power, and then back to soft power in a hope that that's going to work. And it's just not. And for Secretary Blinken to turn around and say that this has been a success, there are images of Afghans dropping from the outside of C-17s as they get airborne from Kabul International Airport. And there are images of those bodies on the rooftops in Kabul. So for any politician to turn around and say that this is a successful operation is just bewildering from my perspective.
Indeed, some experts we've spoken to have gone to the extent to say that this could cost Joe Biden his presidency. And given the backlash that the U.S. is facing at this point, also, Michael, this, of course, is a part of a larger plan to try and deflect some of the blame that the U.S. has received for this mess that they have left behind. Antony Blinken has even tried to blame the Afghan forces for not being able to defend their country. What does this tell us about the U.S., which calls itself a superpower, which is now left urging the Taliban to try and leave the Afghans and let them depart from Afghanistan?
Well, look, I certainly don't think that this would cost President Biden his presidency. Absolutely not. I think what we're seeing here, the catalyst for what we're seeing now and the initiation all started under the Trump administration through negotiations with the Taliban, sidelining the government of Afghanistan. So I think that's where the problems started. But absolutely, President Biden, if indeed he wanted to go ahead with the conditions that were set during the Trump administration, then the contingency planning for this non-combatant evacuation and the conditions of withdrawal should have been analysed and should have been cemented much, much better than they already have. And I think just what we're seeing every hour of every day at the moment playing out, and the scenes in the capital and across Afghanistan is just evidence that whatever contingency planning took place, or whatever planning for this non-combatant evacuation operation, and let's be in no doubt, it is a non-combatant evacuation operation, even though those words aren't being used, is actually occurring. Look, let's rewind all the way back to the reason for going into Afghanistan in the first place, and that was post 9/11, and it was to. So what I'm saying is that over those 3 months in that first mission of neutralizing the Al Qaeda camps through which the 9/11 attacks were trained for. That was actually successful, albeit a lot of the Al Qaeda personnel were driven across the border, the porous border into Pakistan, and we know that because Osama bin Laden was found in Abbottabad. But the mission that was taken on after that, which, and again, this is important, it was a State Department mission, which was to extend centralized governance from Kabul out to the provinces, the districts, and the shuras. The military then went in to support that extension of centralized governance to provide the security component. Now, if you ask me now, 20 years later, centralized governance just was never going to work inside a country that had, hundreds of tribal entities that go back hundreds of years with local traditions. So decentralized governance, looking back, was or should have been the way to go. So, I mean, there are many, many lessons to have been learned here. My fear is that, as per 1975 in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, with the evacuation there, this doesn't appear to have been any lessons learned. Will there be any lessons learned in the future? I'm not sure there will.
Michael, would you say that the U.S. Failed to anticipate the chaos that their pullout would ultimately result in? Or do you view this as a part of the plan itself? It's also a failure to some extent, would you not agree, of American intelligence assessments. First, they said that Kabul would fall in 90 days, then 30 days, and it did not even take 3 days.
Well, I mean, just looking at what's going on the ground at the moment, there are a lot of failings. But I do think that you have to disassociate what the military generals are anticipating and feeding the politicians and what the politicians are prioritizing on their agenda. So, what I mean by that is that from the political side, the administration clearly wanted to withdraw all the troops. I do think they would have known that there would have been this chaos that would have been created, but at the same time, I also think that they were content to accept that in order to achieve their main political goal. The other thing I say here, which is really important, is there are reports suggesting that, we talk about, and I've spoken to you about just how this, questioning how this capitulation occurred. There are reports now, especially in the Washington Post today, that negotiations between Taliban and local tribal entities across Afghanistan have been ongoing for months in terms of negotiating a handover. And this is the point of negotiating from a position of leverage. This is really important. Is that if militarily you have failed to put your politicians in a place where they can leverage from power, then what's going to happen in Afghanistan is that the tribal entities are no longer going to prioritize their loyalty to an occupying force. They're going to look beyond that, especially if they know that the occupying force is going to withdraw, and then they're going to cement relationships with who they think is going to be the next people holding the power, which, to them will have been the Taliban. So there are reports now suggesting that negotiations have been going on for months about the handover of power inside these provincial capitals, which is what facilitated the massive capitulation that we saw.
Right. Michael, the UN Security Council will be holding an emergency session on the Afghanistan crisis. 60 countries have urged the Taliban to let the Afghans leave the country, those who want to leave. How optimistic are you about international intervention helping at this point or going forward?
Well, one of the massive problems with the UN Security Council, the Permanent Five, which comprises of the US, the UK, France, Russia, and China, one of the big problems with that is to secure any form of UN Security Council resolution. There has to be a unanimous vote amongst the P5. And already, earlier on in your report, you alluded to the fact that China will recognize a Taliban government over the government of Afghanistan. So immediately, that places any joint statement of 60 countries that will be potentially filtered through the UN Security Council. If China are going to veto any form of pressure, then it's all nullified. And this is one of the problems we've seen of the UN Security Council and the paralysis of that through veto votes, and we've seen that across Syria, we've seen that across Iraq, we've seen that across all forms of instability across the world where the UN has tried to intervene. But the Security Council, between Russia and China, and then the UK, the US, and France, there's always been a disparity about what the outcome should be, and therefore, no action.
China has now become the first country to actually acknowledge the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan. How do you react to that?
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that China has come out and acknowledged that. China will be acting in accordance with their best interests, but they'll also be acting from a diplomatic level to make a real point here. I think China's what China right now will be to through their diplomatic efforts is to make America look weak, and by acknowledging or recognizing a Taliban government inside Afghanistan less than 24 hours from the Taliban walking inside the palace and taking over, I think is is something that China are very happy to do in terms of trying to make America look small and silly.
All right, leaving it there for the moment. Michael K., thanks very much for joining us and sharing those perspectives. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.